Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what is honestly one of the most fascinating theological mysteries out there. We're looking at a profound, almost cinematic claim spanning the ancient texts of the Hebrew Bible all the way through the New Testament. Specifically, we're exploring how the New Testament actually identifies Yeshua, Jesus, as the visible Yahweh of the Hebrew Bible. We're talking about the Word made flesh, the exact image of the invisible God, the one who fully shares Yahweh's name, his glory, his throne, his worship, and his ultimate authority. Let's kick things off with a pretty provocative question. Think back through those ancient texts. Who exactly was the figure who bore the divine name, revealed the glory, rode on the clouds, and sat right there at Yahweh's right hand? I mean, was this just a series of created angels passing the baton? Or was it the God of Israel himself, actively making himself known in a way that humanity could actually perceive and interact with? To unpack this, we're going to move through 6 key stages today. We'll start with the ancient Tanakh pattern, see how John reveals the Word, look at how exclusive Yahweh texts are applied directly to Yeshua, explore his cosmic role as creator and king, tackle some common theological objections, and finally, wrap up with the final divine confession. All right, let's jump into section 1, the ancient Tanakh pattern of Yahweh unseen and Yahweh seen. You know, when we look at the Tanakh, the theological landscape doesn't just give us this flat, distant version of monotheism. Instead, we constantly see these active, highly localized manifestations. We're talking about the angel of Yahweh, the name, the word, the glory cloud, the wisdom, and the presence. And here's the crucial part. These aren't minor deities or intermediate demigods. They are Yahweh himself, directly interacting with humanity. The ancient Israelites were actually totally comfortable holding these two realities together, Yahweh unseen up in the heavens, and Yahweh seen right down here on earth, often in human form, just like the men who visited Abraham at Mamre. And this ancient pattern points us to a really fascinating framework often called the two powers in heaven, which was actually an orthodox idea in ancient Judaism. Take a look at these texts. Daniel 7 shows a son of man riding the clouds. Now, cloud riding was a strictly divine prerogative, yet here he is, coming to share the throne of the Ancient of Days. At the exact same time, over in Psalm 110, you have Yahweh inviting a second figure, David's Lord, to sit at his right hand. So right there, in the ancient texts, we have a second figure who completely shares the divine throne and the universal sovereignty of Israel's God. Moving right along to section 2, John reveals the Word, where the visible God actually becomes flesh. Now, this is exactly where that ancient pattern we just talked about converges into a real, historical person. John's opening in his gospel is literally a masterpiece of theology. He clarifies that this pre-existent Word, the sole agent of creation, didn't just stay in heaven. He literally tabernacled, or dwelt, in human flesh to make the unseen Father known to us. Notice the deliberate phrasing here. The Word was with God, which distinguishes the persons, and the Word was God, meaning they share the exact same divine essence. It's brilliant. Later on in John's Gospel, Yeshua gets into this incredibly fierce debate with the religious leaders. They're demanding to know how he could have possibly seen Abraham, and Yeshua's response? He uses the absolute present tense, I am. By doing this, he is making a deliberate, frankly shocking claim to be the self-existent God who spoke to Moses from the burning bush. Notice he doesn't say, before Abraham was, I was. No, he says, I am, directly echoing the divine name from Exodus 3. For anyone reading this in a first-century context, the implications are absolutely massive. The religious leaders understood his claim perfectly, which is exactly why they picked up stones right after he said it. Furthermore, John does something amazing in chapter 12. He retroactively identifies the pre-incarnate Yeshua as the very Lord seated upon the heavenly throne in Isaiah's majestic temple vision. If you remember Isaiah 6, it describes Yahweh of hosts, high and lifted up, right? Well, John tells us plainly here that Isaiah saw Yeshua's glory and was speaking directly about him. And all of this culminates with Thomas's ultimate confession when he finally sees the resurrected Yeshua. Thomas doesn't just express shock or surprise. He says, my Lord and my God. He uses the exact exclusive covenantal titles for the God of Israel, and the vital takeaways here is how Yeshua responds. He accepts this worship entirely without any correction. He doesn't say, whoa, Thomas, don't call me that. By accepting it, he absolutely confirms his identity as Yahweh made flesh. Okay, let's shift to section 3, Yahweh texts applied to Yeshua, or how the New Testament authors retrofitted the Old Testament. So the New Testament authors did something quite radical. They systematically took exclusive Yahweh text and applied them directly to Yeshua. For instance, the Gospel of Mark opens by taking Isaiah 40's command to prepare the way for Yahweh and just applies it straight to John the Baptist preparing the way for Yeshua. And take a look at this comparison right here. Paul takes Isaiah 45, which is arguably the ultimate Old Testament expression of monotheistic exclusivity, and he applies it perfectly to the exalted name of Yeshua in Philippians 2. He's saying that every knee bowing to Yeshua is actually what brings ultimate glory to the Father. Now, check out what Paul does here in 1 Corinthians. He brilliantly reworks the Shema, the central daily prayer of Jewish monotheism from Deuteronomy, declaring that God is one. To include Yeshua within this strict, uncompromising confession, Paul isn't creating two separate gods. No way. Instead, he reveals that the one God and the one Lord of Deuteronomy are actually the Father and Yeshua, fully united within the unique identity of Israel's God. We see this exact same pattern with salvation, too. The very mechanism of salvation in the prophet Joel, everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved, is mapped directly by Paul to confessing Yeshua as Lord in Romans 10. The implications here are huge. Paul is basically saying that to call upon Yeshua for salvation is, quite literally, to call upon Yahweh. Let's move into Section 4, Creator, Sustainer, and King, looking at the cosmic Christ. Now we're zooming out to the cosmic visions we find in letters like Colossians and Hebrews, which show us Yeshua's sovereign role over all creation. And let me be clear, the text here leaves absolutely zero room for Yeshua being some sort of intermediary, created being. These specific details place him firmly on the divine side of the creator-creature divide. He's not just a tool used for creation. Colossians says he actively holds the very laws of physics together. Hebrews tells us he is the exact radiance of God's glory. And in Hebrews 1, we even see the Father himself addressing the Son as God, declaring his throne is forever and ever. And then you get to the stunning imagery in Revelation. John seamlessly transfers the visual attributes of the Eternal Father, the Ancient of Days from Daniel, directly onto the resurrected Yeshua. Hair like white wool, eyes like flames of fire. Later on, in chapters 5 and 22, we see the Lamb sharing the single divine throne and receiving the exact same universal worship as the Father. They aren't separated. They are worshipped together, seamlessly by all of creation. That brings us to Section 5, addressing the theological objections. Let's impartially evaluate some of the common counterarguments. Naturally, when you have such high, exalted claims, objections are going to pop up. People often ask, well, isn't this all just a later Gentile invention? But a really close reading of the text systematically blocks any of those intermediary categories for Yeshua. People ask if he's just a created agent. Well, Colossians 1 refutes that, stating he is the creator of all things. Could he be just an exalted angel? Hebrews 1 spends a whole chapter arguing he is vastly superior to all angels. Is he only a functional Lord? Philippians 2 shows he fully shares the exclusive divine name. And does this violate the Shema? Not at all. 1 Corinthians 8 includes him perfectly within the one God identity. The biblical text anticipates these objections and answers them directly. All right, let's bring it all home in Section 6, the final divine confession, looking at the pattern and the identity. Bringing all these threads together, we can see a beautiful, cohesive picture. The Tanakh gives us the profound pattern of the visible and invisible Yahweh, and then the New Testament steps in and explicitly reveals the identity of that visible manifestation. Yeshua is Yahweh, the visible Son, distinct from the unseen Father, yet fully sharing the divine identity of the one God of Israel. This theology isn't some later invention bolted onto the text. It is the continuous, organically unfolding revelation of the God of Israel. It shows a deep, highly intentional continuity from the very beginning of Genesis all the way through to the end of Revelation. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, striking reality to think about. The one who appeared to Abraham, who spoke from the burning bush, who bore the name, who led Israel through the wilderness, who revealed the glory, who came with the clouds, and who sat at Yahweh's right hand, is the exact same Yeshua who became flesh, died, rose, currently reigns, and will return in glory. If that is true, how does that change the way you read your Bible? And more importantly, how you view the Jesus of the New Testament?